Alright guys, second video. My first video went up last week and I learned a lot. The first thing I learned is that my music intro is too long. So here's my new one. Just kidding. This is it. That's better, right? It feels better. So first things first, welcome back. You're here on Spellbound. I'm BJ the Book Witch, and you're watching an episode of Book Both Ways. This is where I talk about books from a perspective of both a reader and a writer. Okay, but who are you even? I get that. Step 1, establish credibility. So for the past 6 years or so, I've been a writer for Disney. I've written everything from shows and scripts to immersive entertainment experiences and interactive character programs. Point is, I'm a writer, background and degrees in writing and film production, and a master's pending in professional creative writing. So, credibility established? Step 2, proceed with enthusiasm. All right, we're all readers here. You ever read a book that's so good, it's like quality literature, but you're also kind of completely content to never read it again? Sure you have. Sometimes we call those classics. Or what about you have a favorite book and you absolutely love it, and it means a lot to you, but you would probably never recommend it to a friend because you're a little embarrassed because technically it's not very good? Looking at you, Twilight. What do you do with that? Is it good? Is it well written? Did you enjoy it? Is it a fun ride? Would you recommend it to a friend? Sometimes these are all really difficult questions for even our most favorite books. So that's what we talk about here. This is a safe space. And what are topics worth talking about as writers, as readers, and as book people? One topic that I know book people take very seriously and very personally are book-to-screen adaptations. So that's what this episode is all about. And we'll be pulling a book from this month's TBRs to use as our prime example. The Pale Horse by Agatha Christie. Agatha Christie is a mystery writer, and she's actually the most best-selling author of all time. She wrote classic mystery novels like Murder on the Orient Express, Three Blind Mice, and Then There Were None. She's written over 75 books in her lifetime that are still being read, reviewed, and are still relevant. So The Pale Horse is about a murdered priest who is clocked on the head right after he hears a mysterious deathbed confession from a woman, and she gives him a list of names. Most of the people on this list are already dead from natural causes. So the main character works to unravel the mystery of what this list of names has to do with this priest and what they both have to do with this really strange local pub called the Pale Horse. So the book itself, it's a mystery. And I found you either like mysteries or you don't. Or really, you really just have to be in the right mood for a mystery. That's fair. Typically, a crime happens right at the beginning, and then a single curious character spends the rest of the book picking up clues along the way, trying to figure out how or why that crime occurred in the beginning. So naturally, they're very dialogue heavy because it's a lot of conversations with, your single curious character and all of these different other main characters trying to piece together and solve the crime. And the majority of the action or big action takes place in the past or through flashback. So that can make mysteries feel slow or boring because there's not a lot of big events that occur after the crime. And they can be confusing. You meet a lot of characters very quickly, and you don't know when you first meet them if they're going to be main characters or not. And because you don't have the benefit of experiencing a lot of scenes with really big action throughout the book, it's really hard to distinguish between who you need to pay attention to and who you can kind of let fade into the background. So for that reason, the first act of many mystery novels can be very confusing and very fast-paced, while the second act kind of slows down because it's just either reliving events that have already happened or having conversations about action that we don't see in real time. So I can see why you would need to be in the mood for a mystery. It's like being in the mood for a play versus a movie. And the same is true for this book. The Pale Horse is a good mystery, but I did find it a little slow for all of the reasons that I just mentioned. But it does have some pretty neat elements, and once some of the more central themes began to show themselves, I became infinitely more invested. For example, the three witches, as in the three witches from Macbeth. This is a concept that shows itself right from the beginning. Right in the first couple of scenes, you have the main character sitting with a group of people and they're discussing the most recent adaptation of Shakespeare's Macbeth that they had just all seen together. And they were talking about how they would portray the characters of the three witches if they were making their own interpretation. And one character says, well, if it were up to me, I would just make them regular, ordinary people because that's all witches are. And as it turns out, there really are three witch characters in The Pale Horse. So I was all about that. But before we explore that, come with me on this tangent for a minute and let's talk about those three witches from Macbeth. Why did Agatha Christie choose those three witches, if not for their cool themed music intro from Act 1? Bubble, bubble, toil and trouble, fire burn in cauldron bubble. I'm telling you guys, theme music, it'll make or break your brand. Anyway, in Macbeth, the three witches show up at every major plot point throughout the play. And you, the reader, or the audience, because it's Shakespeare, are left to question, and indeed intended to question, what level of responsibility a prophecy has in the events that follow. Or to be more specific, what determines a self-fulfilling prophecy? So if I say, today you're going to win $1 million, and then after that, you drive home and you stop by the grocery store and you pick up a lottery ticket and that lottery ticket wins you $1 million. Did I cause that by sharing my prophecy, or was that going to happen anyway and I just told you? Would you have stopped by for a lottery ticket had I not told you that you would win today? And that's what the witches are all about in Macbeth. So they show up at these crucial plot points where everything that they had previously prophesied comes to pass. And Macbeth is wondering, ooh, did they just report on what was going to happen, or did they cause it by telling me? So this idea is played within The Pale Horse through these three witch characters. The three witches in The Pale Horse claim that they can cause something that's technically already inevitable, like death. And we as readers go on this journey with the protagonist to see exactly how that comes to fruition throughout the book. And I was all about those vibes. Hi, I'm Fable. Overall, this book is a good mystery. It hooks you, it starts unraveling that string of suspense, it pulls that string taut, and then snip, mystery solved, and the entire plot is wrapped up nicely with that same string with the perfect denouement. A denouement is literally the part after the climax when one of the characters walks everybody through the events of the story and explains how everything happened. So it's the part in Murder, She Wrote where Angela Lansbury looks at the suspect and says, "It was you," and then she walks everybody through all of the plot points that you've seen over the episode. Meanwhile, small town cop Tom Bosley just looks on her in admiration. I love Murder, She Wrote. That's the book. But this episode is on adaptations, and I love adaptations. And I love talking about adaptations. Here's a story. I didn't read Harry Potter until last year, and I didn't watch any of the Harry Potter movies until last year. We can talk about my childhood another time. Working at Disney as a writer on a content team with other book people, Harry Potter conversations were inevitable, and they were constant, and I loved them so much even though I hadn't read the books myself. My favorite conversations were the ones where everybody talked about which movie they liked best because of which book they liked best and which adaptations they preferred. I loved hearing everybody explain that because they get so passionate. You know, when you find a book that you love and it's special to you, and then you're able to find an adaptation that so perfectly matches what you always envisioned, or provides you with such a new perspective to visit your favorite world and characters, that's kind of a magical experience. And I love that. I did remedy the tragedy of having never watched Harry Potter, never having read Harry Potter. I read them all in 3 weeks and then watched all of the movies right after the books, and obviously loved them. Obviously have my own feelings and opinions on which adaptation is my favorite, which I won't tell you because it's a wildly unpopular opinion. Yay Harry Potter, boo J.K. Rowling, and I get it. Adaptations can be really personal. And this book is adapted too. It's currently a series on Amazon Prime. I use the term series loosely because it's a 2-episode series and each of those episodes are 1 hour long. But let's talk about the adaptation. And I'm going to try to do this without revealing any spoilers or without revealing any more than I guess I already have. So the 2-part series stars Rufus Sewell. You would know him if you saw him. And while the characters and the elements are the same, the narrative tells a different story. And that's pretty common. But let's talk about why. So I'm pretty forgiving when an adaptation doesn't stick to the original story. And that's because sometimes they can't. Adaptations have to be written completely differently. When you're approaching any type of writing, the first thing you have to establish is who your audience is and what type of medium this is going to be presented through. You have to know how your audience is going to consume your content because that will affect how you tell your story. And books are wonderful. Obviously, I love books. But film and TV are completely different. So when you're storytelling, you have to use different tactics to accomplish the same thing. So, for example, in a book, if you wanted to have a character suddenly remember something, you could just write that they had a thought. And that might take a paragraph, maybe 2. But you don't have the luxury in film and TV of just being able to jump inside a character's head. Everything has to be communicated visually. So, to accomplish the same thing, you could have the character be having a flashback and you would show that flashback as a new scene. But everything has to be visual. So sometimes the entire story needs to be restructured to be visual. So think of it like this. In a book, you have the opportunity to go in so many different directions. You can tangent, you can diverge, you can show multiple perspectives. But you don't always have that luxury with film. But what you can do with film is you can go really, really deep in a way that may feel really sluggish in a book. And the richness and the muchness comes from all of these other film elements that help build that world and make it really deep and substantial because it can't go in a million different directions. So that richness and that muchness, it comes from film stuff. It comes from mise en scène and sound and music and acting and all of these other elements that make up its rich production value and make it be a good story in and of itself, even if it's a different story than what you read in the book. But what determines a successful adaptation? So as I've said, I'm pretty forgiving of adaptations when they don't stick to the original story entirely. To me, it's more important that the theme of the book comes through in the adaptation as opposed to the sum of the elements or the entirety of the plot. I think some really great examples of this would be Baz Luhrmann with his adaptation of Romeo and Juliet and Great Gatsby. I think that he was able to communicate the essence, the theme, and the poetry of his originals, even if he took a lot of liberties with the direction. Other great examples of this, in my opinion, are some of the really great teen comedies that we've seen in the past 20 years that are adaptations of Shakespeare, like She's the Man with Amanda Bynes and 10 Things I Hate About You with Julia Stiles and Heath Ledger. And the best is, in my opinion, Clueless, which is a flawless adaptation of Jane Austen's Emma. So Clueless tells a completely different narrative in a completely different time frame than Emma. And yet, it tells the same story. That, to me, is a successful adaptation. In this adaptation, we have the same characters and the same premise as the book, but the narrative that the plot takes us is different. So as is typical with many adaptations, the narrative itself is more narrow and it's more focused on our protagonist in his journey of discovery than the clue-by-clue unraveling of the threads of the book. So the adaptation really doubles down on the Macbethian themes, both with the three witches and with the character and idea of Macbeth himself. By anchoring the story in this way, and the telling of the story in this way, you end up with a really substantial main character, but it does come at the expense of the narrative. So if you were a really big fan of the red herring and plot twist from the book, you might be a little disappointed with the adaptation. But to its credit, the adaptation really does pull the rug right out from under you with a pretty surprising plot twist. Because of that narrowed focus, the adaptation was able to take it a step further. So, with the focus being so tight on those Macbeth vibes and the three witches, the whole thing had a distinctly occultish feel to it, which was pretty cool and refreshing. I anticipated an adaptation of a Christie novel to be that sort of crime noir detective vibe to it, but it wasn't. It was really dark and creepy, and I loved it. It was very witchy with like a 1960s flavor. Overall, I do think that it was a pretty decent 2 episode series, and I think that as an adaptation, it was successful. I was particularly fond of the specific plot twist from the book, but I also believe that that specific element would have been particularly difficult to translate visually, and I don't think it would have worked. And to its credit, it still provided you with a really dramatic plot twist, and the trade off was that it gave the protagonist some much needed and much deserved depth. Either way, I definitely recommend you read The Pale Horse. It's a quick read, only a few hours. You could read it over a rainy afternoon. Or if you prefer movies or really, really short series, you could watch the adaptation. And then please let me know what you think. Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? That's okay. This is a safe space. Either way, tell me how you feel about it. And what other adaptations do you like or dislike and why? So thanks for watching. For a closer look at The Pale Horse, check out my end of the month book wrap up, where I review each of the 10 books that I've read throughout January. But if you simply can't wait, follow me on Instagram because I share all of my Goodreads reviews for each book that I read. And for more episodes of Book Both Ways, I encourage you to subscribe and ring the bell. Happy reading!